In this lesson, we'll learn about driven keys and how they can simplify our rigging process. Driven keys are used to connect attributes very similar to what we've learned in the previous lesson using the connection editor. However, we have more control with driven keys. Now, don't let the term key throw you off. This has nothing to do with animation. The keyframes that are created from this tool are only used to control how we transition from one value to the next. So we'll use driven keys to connect our last two custom parameters in our channel box, the pitch and yaw. The pitch will have a limit value. However, the yaw axis, even though we'll still have a limit by the time we finish our set driven key, I'll show you how that limit can be bypassed. So this is going to be really neat stuff. Let's go ahead and get started. We'll head over to our animation module, and at that point, with our ship selected, we can go ahead and head over to our animate menu, set driven key, and we'll choose the set options. Alright, now let's go ahead and load in our driver, which is the ship. You can see by default it's loaded as the driven, but we'll just need to choose load driver to make sure it's loaded properly. Alright, and then at that point we can go ahead and grab our pitch axis. Okay, so now it's time to select what should be driven. What's going to be controlled? Well, we know that is our gun group. So let's go ahead and select one piece on the gun, hit the up arrow to grab its group, and then we can go ahead and load that in as the driven object. Specifically, the x-axis. Alright, so it's a good idea to make sure that this value is zeroed out, and likewise your custom attribute, so we can set our initial or default key. Alright, so once double checking that, and you can select between your objects by clicking on them in your driven list. Alright, so once double checking that, we need to grab the pitch axis and the rotate X, and now we can go ahead and set our initial key. So this is the default position, great. Now let's go ahead and set our max position where the gun is rotated up. So we first need to go to our driver and set its max value, which we know to be 10. And then we'd go to the driven object and rotate that to a point where we'd like the gun to stop at. So you can see we're setting up a relative link. So that's one of the cool features that set driven keys have over the connection editor. Okay, so at this point we can go ahead and choose a value. I'll just go ahead and round this out to -21. It was close enough there. And now, once we find that max value, we can now choose key, and watch this. Selecting our ship, if we were to go back to our pitch axis and start to move that value, you can see now we have created that relationship. And again, it is relative. You can see when this is at 10, well, our gun is at -21. Now, how does this all look? Where do the keyframes come in? Well, you can see for one, our channel is highlighted an orange or reddish type of color. So that's one indication. Another indication is via the graph editor. If we were to go ahead and open that up with the gun selected, well, it's going to give us some information. So what we see here on the top, here's our default value. On the bottom, here's the max value that we've set. So you can see here, both channels are at 0. However, when we go to our bottom key, we can see that here is our driver value of 10, and here's our driven value of -21. Now you can see that we have this type of smooth interpolation, this ease out of our first key and the ease into our last key. I won't get too far into the explanation of how the F-curves work, not in this section. We'll save that for the animation section. However, what we see here is that we're going to get a slow out of our initial value, and then it will start to speed up, and then we will cushion into our last value. So that's the type of behavior we'll see when we start to use that custom parameter. So if we wanted to, we can have more of a constant speed or a linear control. In order to do that, it's just a matter of, again, grabbing that object from your set-driven key dialog, selecting your curve, and setting the interpolation to linear. You can use this icon for that. So watch this. Now when we go to our channel, selecting our ship and use the pitch axis, should notice a difference in the behavior. Okay, now we have, again, more of a linear type of control. And this might be best for animation. That way the animator can choose what timing he or she would like when animating this object. Okay, great. So now it's time to finish up by working on our yaw axis. So let's go ahead and select the yaw axis, making sure it's set to 0. And then we'll need to link our y-axis of the gun. So we'll need to now select that. Let's make sure both of those are selected and set to 0. And now we can set an initial key. And now we can go ahead and set our min value. We could always start with that. It's the same process here. We can go to, let's say, about a value of -40. Remember, we didn't set a limit on our yaw axis, so we'll go ahead and give this a direct connection instead of a relative one that we use for our pitch axis. So with the yaw set to -40, we can have our gun also set to -40, and we'll set our next key. Now going back to our ship, let's go ahead and set our max value. So that will be the reciprocal, +40. And now we'll need to go to our gun and set that to +40 and set our last key. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at the control we now have. So selecting our ship, if we were to start to use the yaw axis, beautiful. Let's go ahead and take a look at our graph editor again. So with the gun group selected, I'll just go ahead and select one of its pieces and hit the up arrow. With that selected, need to make sure we grab the actual gun group. There we go. Just needed to hit the up arrow one more time. What you'll see is our animation curve, and here's the rotate y-axis. Alright, so let's go ahead and press the F key to frame in on it. And again, we have the same type of behavior in our F curve. So what we could do is go ahead and select the curve and set it to linear. Okay, great. Now, how can we have this bypass its limit of -40 and +40? Well, what we can do is simply set our F-curve to cycle infinitely with an offset. So let's go ahead and select that for the pre-infinity and post-infinity. And then we can head over to View and choose Infinity to see the result of what we've just done. So just to show you this without it set to infinite, I'll go ahead and set this back to constant. You can see, all right, we're going to get this flat line. This means that this is where it's going to stop at this value. However, if we were to go back to that same choice and then choose cycle with offset, it's going to keep going. Now to prove this, I'll go ahead and close out the graph editor, and we can go ahead and grab our ship control and start to use our yaw axis. Remember, there was a limit before. However, we no longer have that limit. No longer exists. Beautiful. So that's just one of the exciting tools Maya provides to connect attributes together ideally. So in this lesson, we have learned how to work with driven keys. We've learned how powerful they are and how much more of an advantage they are to use over the connection editor. Now, with that said, the connection editor is great for doing basic connections. However, if you want more of a relative type of control, you might want to stick with set-driven keys.